unprecedented, crippling sanctions on Iran.
Iran has been a very dangerous player. They're a nation of terror.
Inshallah به توفیق الهی دشمن رو به زانو در خواهیم آورد.
For the past 2 days, the Iran story stopped being pressure and started looking like open war. U.S. and Israeli strikes have been reported across Iran, while Iran's missile and drone response has pushed alarms and air defenses across the region. And in the middle of that fog, one question has dominated everything: who is still in control in Tehran and who is not? This matters because the moment leadership becomes uncertain, wars stop following scripts, they follow reflexes. Now here's the part most people miss. This didn't begin in the last 48 hours. This confrontation has a long fuse. And you can hear it in the voices that shaped it, decade after decade, until it finally reached this point. The relationship between Washington and Tehran hasn't always sounded like this, but over time, the language hardened into labels, threats, sanctions, and promises of resistance.
An axis of evil.
Unprecedented, crippling sanctions on Iran.
Iran has been a very dangerous player. They're a nation of terror.
Inshallah به توفیق الهی دشمن رو به زانو در خواهیم آورد.
Those lines are a timeline, but they're not the beginning. The real story starts earlier, when Iran and the United States weren't enemies at all. For decades, Iran sat in a strategic position the West considered essential, especially once oil became the hinge of modern power.
Iran, because of the great leadership of the Shah, is an island of stability in one of the more troubled areas of the world.
That was the official mood: partnership, security, predictability. But under that surface, a different pressure was building, one that would eventually turn stability into resentment, and resentment into rupture. Oil changed everything. When major reserves were discovered in southwestern Iran at the start of the 20th century, Iran's role on the global stage was rewritten overnight. A British company that would later become BP helped set up the oil industry, and for a time, the business looked like success. But inside Iran, the question became simple. If the wealth is under Iranian ground, why does so much of it leave Iranian hands?
The problem was there was so much wealth to be gained from the oil that was being extracted that then they could see all of that money just leaving the country.
That grievance didn't stay abstract. It turned into politics, and into one of the most consequential moves in modern Middle Eastern history. Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh came to power promising to nationalize Iran's oil. He did it in 1951. Britain responded with a boycott. Exports collapsed over the next 2 years. And then, in 1953, American and British intelligence agencies orchestrated a coup to push him out.
So America saw Mossadegh as being someone who would develop ties between Iran and Russia. So basically, it was an opportunity that then allowed American oil companies to get a foothold in the Iranian market.
That moment planted a memory that never went away. In Tehran's view, the West didn't just compete with Iran, it decided Iran's leadership when it didn't like the direction. After the coup, the Western-backed Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, consolidated power. For the next 26 years, with U.S. support, the Shah pushed infrastructure, land reforms, education, and women's voting rights. Society transformed fast and unevenly. Economic growth rose, but not everyone benefited equally. Some religious leaders saw the reforms as a threat to Islamic values. And as pressure grew, the Shah increased political control, tightening the system with surveillance and force.
In Iran, under Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi becomes much stronger, and he has American support to train up his secret police, to interrogate people and to try and stamp out any possible areas of opposition.
That is where the relationship begins to rot. Because when a population sees domestic repression as foreign-backed, anger stops being only internal. It becomes geopolitical. By the late 1970s, Iran saw riots, strikes, and mass protests across society, and then came the rupture, the Iranian Revolution of 1979. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned from exile and established an Islamic Republic. Iran's identity shifted, not only politically, but in how it saw the outside world.
ما پیروزیمون وقتی است که دست این اجانب از مملکتمون کوتاه شود.
Iran was no longer a friend and overnight becomes an enemy.
That overnight shift wasn't just rhetoric, it became policy, and then it became a crisis that locked the US and Iran into a new pattern for decades. In November 1979, a group of students stormed the US Embassy in Tehran and held dozens of Americans hostage for more than a year. The relationship fundamentally changed. The US imposed economic sanctions for the first time, banning trade, including oil. Before the hostage crisis even ended, Iraq invaded Iran. Saddam Hussein believed the new Islamic Republic was weak and could be quickly defeated. Instead, the war lasted 8 years, and more than 500,000 people died. Though officially neutral, the US secretly backed Iraq with financial aid, weapons, and intelligence. And near the end of the war, on July 3, 1988, the US shot down an Iranian civilian plane. It said it mistook for a fighter jet, killing 290 people. Every one of those events added a layer to Iran's view of the US as not merely a rival, but an existential threat. Over time, rhetoric against the US and against Israel strengthened. Iran has denied Israel's right to exist since the 1979 revolution, and Iran's leadership framed the conflict as survival.
The Islamic Republic is concerned the US poses an existential threat to Iran. Israel also poses an existential threat to Iran and think as the only Shia Persian state in the region, nobody likes them. And if Iran does not take its fight away from its homeland, it would have to face its enemies on Iranian soil.
That logic shaped Iran's long-term strategy: push influence outward, build armed partners beyond its borders, and create buffers that keep war away from Iranian territory. Since the revolution, that network expanded. Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and other groups in Iraq and Syria, often described collectively as the axis of resistance. At the same time, Western concerns about Iran's nuclear program hardened into more sanctions.
Iran has sanctions that the US has imposed on Iran because of its nuclear program. There are sanctions because of its regional activities, what the US calls terrorist activities in the Middle East. And there are also sanctions on the Islamic Republic because of the violations on human rights.
That is the three-track pressure: nuclear, regional, internal repression, each one feeding the next. After more than a decade of negotiations, Iran signed a 2015 agreement to limit its nuclear program. In exchange, the US and others lifted sanctions, allowing Iran to sell oil internationally again. But it didn't hold. During Trump's first presidency, the US pulled out and reimposed sanctions, and Trump's framing was blunt.
At the heart of the Iran deal was a giant fiction that a murderous regime desired only a peaceful nuclear energy program.
Tensions escalated under the maximum pressure campaign. Iran's economy, already strained by decades of sanctions and mismanagement, worsened. In 2019, the US accused Iran of attacking oil tankers and drones in the region. Then in 2020, Iran's top military commander, General Qasem Soleimani, was killed by a US drone strike in Iraq. That single strike didn't end the conflict. It accelerated the direction toward more direct confrontation. On October 7, 2023, Hamas attacked Israel, sparking more than 2 years of war in Gaza. Iran denied direct involvement, but supported Hamas publicly. Israel responded with sustained attacks in Gaza and against Iranian allies and proxies. In June 2025, the UN nuclear watchdog said Iran had breached its nuclear obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran insisted it never sought a nuclear weapon. Then Israel launched strikes on Iran, leading to a 12-day war that culminated in direct US involvement, including airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities.
Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat.
Since the Iranian Revolution, the US and Iran were fighting each other in different arenas, diplomatic, economic, political, espionage, cyber. The only thing that had not happened was the use of military force. but he broke that taboo.
Once that taboo breaks, it's hard to rebuild it. The threshold changes. Each new crisis starts closer to the edge. In September 2025, the UN reimposed sanctions that had been lifted in 2015. The economy worsened. Food price inflation surged, and Iran's currency fell, pushing up the cost of imports like cooking oil, wheat, and medicine. By late December, shopkeepers and merchants protested. Demonstrations spread. Calls for political change grew, with crowds chanting against Khamenei. Some called for the return of the exiled son of the former Shah, Reza Pahlavi. The regime cracked down. Thousands were killed. Trump publicly warned the regime against violence.
We don't want to see what's happening in Iran happen. And, if they want to have protests, that's one thing. When they start killing thousands of people, and now you're telling me about hanging, we'll see how that works out for them. It's not going to work out good.
Khamenei blamed Trump for the protests and deaths.
ما رئیس جمهور آمریکا رو مجرم می‌دانیم، هم به خاطر تلفات، هم به خاطر خسارات، هم به خاطر تهمتی که به ملت ایران زد.
Reza Pahlavi, from exile, welcomed Trump's support.
And I believe that President Trump is a man of his word, and ultimately he will stand with the Iranian people as he has said.
But even inside Iran's opposition, the feeling was mixed.
Who can easily see, okay, so the enemy of my enemy is then my friend. So if Trump is the enemy of Khamenei, Trump could be helpful.
For many Iranians, outside intervention is not an easy yes. It's complicated, because the cost of escalation doesn't stay contained.
Regional countries are concerned about Iran's actions once Iran gets cornered. This is why you're seeing the Arab countries of the Persian Gulf lobbying against the U.S. striking Iran, because they know that they will be caught in the crossfire of the United States and Iran.
And now, in the last 48 hours, that crossfire is no longer theoretical. What makes the last 2 days different is scale and momentum. Reporting says the U.S. and Israel are treating this as a campaign, not a message. Iran is responding with missiles and drones, and the region is feeling it across airspace, shipping, and security calculations, because when strikes widen, neutral territory becomes launch space, and launch space becomes target space. If operations are measured in weeks, then every actor starts planning for endurance, not shock. That changes decisions, escalation ladders, proxy activation, maritime threats, and the political stakes inside Iran itself. This is exactly why leadership questions matter so much. When a system loses clarity at the top, whether through confirmed death, disputed reports, or emergency succession, the risk is not only more strikes, the risk is miscalculation, commanders acting without clean authorization, proxies acting on their own timelines, air defenses firing under panic, and governments in the region making split-second choices that widen the war. That warning line is important. In fast-moving conflicts, especially with restricted media access, some facts settle quickly and others stay contested. The job is to track what can be confirmed, flag what cannot, and keep focus on what changes the strategic picture. So when you hear the slogans, axis of evil, crippling sanctions, nation of terror, bring the enemy to their knees, you're not hearing random soundbites. You're hearing a relationship that moved, step by step, from partnership to resentment, from resentment to rupture, and from rupture to a cycle that kept tightening. And now that cycle has reached the phase the region feared most: direct strikes, direct retaliation, and the possibility of leadership instability inside Iran at the same time.